I wanted to send a brief message to thank the many people who have subscribed to this channel and provided me with such warm, encouraging and intelligent comments in the past year or so. I wanted in particular to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, or a Happy Holidays or Diwali, Hanukkah, or whatever it is you may celebrate around this time of year, or even if you don't. The purpose of this channel being necessarily a somber one, I thought to bring a little levity into it in keeping with the season and without straying too far from the channel's theme. Apart from the fun I have had at my own and others' expense here, this mildly amusing tale does have a serious purpose. So I give you the cat's defence.
It was just after 4:20 on the afternoon of the 22nd of December 1929. Jane Peabody had spent the morning doing some last-minute Christmas shopping and returned to her home at 73 Ormeley Road, Balham, in South London. She deposited her shopping bags in the hallway, removed her coat and hat, and went to the kitchen carrying a carton of single cream and a chocolate cake she had purchased. I should mention that Jane, a widow of 50, had been greeted at the door by her black cat, Simba, her constant companion, who followed her to the kitchen, eyeing the pot of cream with covetous intention, meowing plaintively as he threaded himself between her ankles. Jane Peabody picked up Simba and stroked his head affectionately, which, along with certain expectations he entertained with regard to the cream, was doubtless responsible for his purring. "I knew you'd like some, wouldn't you?" she said. "But cream isn't good for cats." She then put a saucer of water down for him and placed him in front of this. Simba regarded the water with surprise and mild disparagement, and his soothing purr ceased abruptly. He returned his gaze to Mrs. Peabody and the pot of cream equally. But this was disregarded, and his mistress proceeded to make herself a cup of tea to have with the cake and cream. She opened the cream and placed it on the kitchen table, along with the cake, and filled the kettle with water. By now the time was 4:30 p.m. She knew this because she later remembered distinctly hearing the grandmother clock in the hall chiming the half-hour. At this point the phone rang, and she went directly out from the kitchen into the hall, where, because of the position of the telephone on a small table, the view of the kitchen was obscured from her vision. She answered the phone to discover it was her niece, Ruth Rowbotham, seeking to confirm the time at which she and her husband Alfie were expected for Christmas dinner 3 days later. They spoke for no more than 5 minutes by her best estimate, although the niece said it was nearer to 30 minutes, when full account was given for the description she had received of her aunt's several medical complaints. In any case, as soon as Mrs. Peabody had replaced the receiver, she returned to the kitchen. The scene she encountered there was one that would live with her for many years to come. On the floor was the pot of cream, and most of it appeared to have been dispersed about the place with some violence. There was cream spatter on the walls and the inner side of the door. What was more disturbing was the fact that a good deal of the cream appeared to have been licked off the floor. Understandably shocked, Mrs. Peabody stood and stared at the terrible scene which confronted her. Although the back door was closed, it was at once apparent to her that an intruder had entered the house by some means. Her first thought was for her beloved cat, Simba, and she rushed to the sitting-room, where, to her great relief, she found him sitting on the sofa with an unaccountably satisfied look on his face. Relieved that Simba had not been harmed, and appeared to be quite oblivious to all the fuss, Jane Peabody decided to call her niece. Ruth, a little surprised and dismayed to hear so soon from her aunt, for fear that some trifling medical affliction had been overlooked in the full account she had been given of her aunt's ailments, was both relieved and alarmed to hear the news, and she said she would send her husband Alfie over at once. Alfie Rowbotham, who was a rather bright young policeman in the Metropolitan Police Force, went over immediately, arriving at Ormeley Road some time after 5 p.m. He surveyed the scene, followed by Mrs. Peabody, cradling a soft purring Simba in her arms, and he saw at once that this must be the work of an intruder. Jane Peabody's neighbour, Helen Wright, who had come over to give her friend succour in her distress, told Alfie that bottles of milk had been reported missing from several doorsteps in the road in recent weeks, and on hearing this, Alfie became convinced that this was the work of a professional dairy thief. A minute examination of the scene revealed that the back door was locked, and as Mrs. Peabody assured him that it had remained locked all day, he could see no obvious solution to the outrage, other than its being the work of a very clever criminal indeed. There was, however, a cat flap near the foot of the door, and at the rear of the garden a large ginger cat was seen sitting on top of a post. Was it possible, he asked, that this cat had gained entry to the house by means of the cat flap in the rear door, and could it be responsible for this terrible business? Mrs. Peabody assured him that it could not, because her cat, Simba, a fierce and territorial animal, would have chased away any interloper, for which unsung service she now stroked him in reward. Mrs. Peabody also told Alfie that the only visitor that day was a tall and spare insurance salesman, a man with white hair, a raincoat, and horn-rimmed glasses. She could give him no further details, but recalled that he had left a calling card for her. Alfie saw at once that the raincoat could have protected the man's clothes from cream spatter. He studied the card. It revealed that the insurance man worked for the Prudential Insurance Company. He phoned him at once and asked him if he had seen anything suspicious, but the man told him he had not. He also told him he had been seconded from the Liverpool office for a few weeks, and that he was glad to be away from his elderly wife for a short time, as she was a right old bag. But he checked himself quickly, Alfie noted, saying, "But of course I love her dearly," and laughed what Alfie would later describe as being a mirthless laugh. Furthermore, he said he had an alibi, as he had left Balham by the 4:35 tram, spoke to a number of people who could bear witness to this, making inquiries about a location which turned out not to exist, in pursuit of a man he did not know, for a purpose which was unknown to him. Satisfied with this, Alfie pursued it no further. The niece, Alfie's wife, Ruth, confirmed the time at which the phone call had been made to her, allowing for the discrepancy relating to its duration, which has already been noted. Several friends of Mrs. Peabody visited that evening, and gave Alfie the benefit of their ideas in the matter. Simba sat on the window ledge throughout, occasionally staring out at the Christmas lights and a group of carol singers at the house opposite, and sometimes looking with great interest at the excited people gathered within. Kate Gilmore, from 3 doors away, told Alfie she had seen a youth lurking in the vicinity of the house that morning as she passed on her way to the shops. He had seen her and quickly darted behind a garden wall. When she returned from the shops, he had gone. Another friend, Maud Blackstock, who worked as an assistant at a grocer's in Balham High Street, by way of corroboration, said that many of her customers had spoken of an unstable youth who had been seen in recent weeks, and that on one occasion she had herself seen this youth stealing milk from a saucer put down for a cat. But Alfie was inclined to be sceptical of this, confiding tactfully to his aunt that he thought the notion fanciful, and to his wife later as plain daft. Agnes Whitty, an elderly lady of number 35 Ormeley Road, said she had noticed a tabby cat in the backyard, and that she had seen it enter the cat flap at number 73 that very morning. Although when Alfie questioned her closely, she said she could not be certain, and perhaps it was at number 27 down the road, where the cat did in fact live. On further reflection, she was also uncertain whether the incident described had occurred on that particular day, or last month, or even last year. She decided at length that it was probably a dream she had had while dozing in her fireside chair that afternoon. A little later, when Alfie alluded further to the matter, she seemed surprised, and stoutly denied she had said any such thing. and said in the full hearing of those present, to Alfie's annoyance, that she thought him daft to entertain such an idea, and what had possessed him to come up with such a silly notion. Alfie drew a deep breath and remained silent, though he confided to his wife later his forthright opinion that the old woman was completely batty. Amongst the many theories proposed amongst the company assembled at number 73 that evening, Mrs. Peabody herself, who had spent the past few minutes trying unsuccessfully to persuade Simba to partake of some food, concluding that he was off his food due to the terror he had suffered, suggested that as she had recently broken off an understanding with a gentleman friend, he might have had a duplicate key to her back door made, entered the house while she was on the phone, and dashed the pot of cream to the floor in a spiteful rage. But on seeing the cream, had been unable to resist lapping some of this up. "It's just like him," she said. "He's greedy, and not right in the head." Compelling as this suggestion might seem, Alfie remained sceptical. He wondered privately whether there was something in the water which contributed to a strain of mental weakness in the Ormeley Road area, manifesting itself on occasion as imbecility. And it must be said that the aunt's theory, for all its persuasiveness, does not explain all the circumstances. Miss Lawson of number 42, a lady of middle years who was much given to reading light romantic fiction, proposed that a romance between the young girl at the post office, Rosie Pertwee, and a handsome young army officer who was home on leave next door to her might have something to do with the matter. Perhaps young Lawrence had defended Rosie's honour against the rude and unpleasant Bill Wetherspoon at number 56, Miss Lawson ventured. "What are you twittering about, dear?" snorted her much more plain-spoken and brusque elder sister. She accompanied this by rolling her eyes and tapping her forehead meaningfully. But this surprising revelation caused some lively debate to ensue on the merits of the idea for a time. But few could see what it had to do with the terrible business of Jane Peabody's kitchen. Although it had the support of a small but vocal minority in the room for a time, there are serious objections to this. There was, in truth, a vast age gap between Bill Wetherspoon and Rosie Pertwee. He was 74 years old and sported a wooden leg, while she was a pretty young girl of 22. Although Wetherspoon was a handsome man in his way, reputed to possess a ribald sailor's humour after a few tots of rum, would his attractions have proved sufficient to turn the head of Rosie Pertwee whilst drawing his 10 shillings per week pension at the post office on Friday? Apart from the obvious similarities of their mutual love of dancing, Rosie Pertwee's taste for this pastime was indulged at the Locarno on Saturday nights, and did not seem comparable to a roisterous jig at the local tavern in Balham High Street, which Bill was widely known for. Furthermore, there is no evidence at all that she shared his love of dominoes, beer, or chewing tobacco, and she would surely have insisted on him putting his teeth in occasionally, which not only rendered his speech scarcely intelligible, but his digestive habits relating in particular to the mastication of food problematic. It did not seem likely, and nor could Miss Lawson's theory be resurrected by a desperate and frankly scandalous suggestion on her part that she might be carrying Bill Wetherspoon's child. But there was, Alfie believed, a far better explanation. It was, of course, that Bill Wetherspoon was himself the culprit and thief. Alfie's theory ran as follows. William Wetherspoon, known to all as Bill, was a retired merchant seaman of 74 years of age, and he had lived in Ormeley Road as long as anyone could remember. It was said that on more than one occasion he had been caught spying on Jane Peabody. He may well have had a strong attraction to her. Jane was still a handsome woman, but whether this attraction was returned by her is open to doubt. Indeed, Jane had rejected Wetherspoon's invitation only that summer to rub suntan lotion on his body one memorably warm July day. The effect on the old sea dog can well be imagined. Far from being discouraged, he increased his efforts. Since her break-up with her gentleman friend, he had sensed an opportunity, an opening in her affections which he hoped to fill. He intensified his efforts. He peeped through her letter-box. He put a ladder up to her bedroom window one evening, but was unable to ascend the ladder successfully, owing to the combined impediments of his imbibication of a quantity of rum and his wooden leg. Did Jane Peabody notice, Alfie wondered, whether items of her underwear had gone missing from the washing line in recent weeks? Although this was not mentioned by anyone, it seemed likely to be the case, given all that he had heard of characters like Bill Wetherspoon. Of course, if it was so, it was quite natural that Mrs. Peabody would not report the theft of her smalls to the police, because the matter was one of some delicacy, and even of personal embarrassment. She understandably would remain silent on the matter. But this would only have increased Bill Wetherspoon's boldness. He would interpret her failure to report the matter as being tacit approval of it. Indeed, what man wouldn't? She wished him to steal her underwear. The two were thus engaged, in his mind at least, in a mutual frisson to their mutual joy and delight. She would knowingly peg her smalls on the line to the rear of her house, and he would naturally take them. It was, properly regarded, a prelude to courtship. He became bolder. It was in fact inevitable that he would become bolder, and fired with a passion that belied his years, the old sea-dog, having fortified himself with rum, awaited Mrs. Peabody's return on the afternoon of the 22nd of December. Of course he had seen her go out shopping earlier. He knew her habits. He had checked the train times. He knew that she had precious few items of underwear left. At last he saw her returning from his window through an old telescope. He saw her coming down the road, saw the bulging shopping bags, laden, he guessed, with fresh underwear, which would soon adorn his bedroom wall with all the others he had taken. He took another swig of rum by way of fortification. His heart was singing. He felt as though he was 20. He saw Mrs. Peabody enter number 73, and out of an access of joy and high-spirited foolishness, he went out into the road and struck up a little sailor's hornpipe while whistling the tune. Creeping to the back door of number 73 and peering unnoticed through the rear window, he observed her with the cake and cream. He thought to bang heavily on the window to attract her attention, but the phone rang just as he raised his hand to rap on the window. Jane left immediately and went into the hall. Bill Wetherspoon was thwarted. He waited, but it was the 22nd of December, and it was by no means a temperate day. The cold began to make his belly and four chins quiver like a Christmas jelly. It was now that Bill took the decision he would come to regret. He decided to attempt to enter by means of the cat flap. Bill considered, with hindsight, that this was ill-advised. He was not, of course, as slim as he had once been, and his good leg was trapped in the cat flap for several worrying minutes. But Bill had another plan. He stripped to his voluminous grey white-front underpants, greased himself up with a tub of rancid butter from his pantry, so that he resembled a well-basted turkey, and addressed himself to the matter of the cat flap again. And in this, with care and the application of a little judicious pressure, he popped out into the kitchen like a celebratory cork. But he underestimated the lubricative qualities of the rancid butter, and its ability to propel him with speed into the kitchen, and this unfortunately led to his disturbing the table and dashing the pot of cream and the chocolate cake to the floor. Mr. Wetherspoon was an intelligent man. He realized that his presence would not be so welcome as he had intended it to be if Mrs. Peabody were to discover her kitchen in this state. He looked around for a mop, but could find none. He had no choice, he decided, but to attempt to lap up the cream as best he could, and he set about doing this. But of course this was no easy task, and to add to his woes, before he had been long at this business, the phone went silent. He heard the receiver being replaced. He was sobering rapidly now, and he realized he was in something of a predicament. He knew that women could be odd creatures. He considered there was every possibility that Mrs. Peabody might see neither humour nor romance in the situation. He had found this out before to his cost, and unhappily it had involved the police on that occasion. There was no telling how Mrs. Peabody might react. Bill Wetherspoon decided the safest course was to retreat from the house, and this he did. Having no time to put on his clothes, he scooped them up hurriedly with one arm and danced out into the street and along Ormeley Road to his own house, which he entered with grateful relief. Having thought this through overnight, Alfie, convinced he had arrived at the correct solution, decided to confront Mr. Wetherspoon with the facts of the case as he plainly saw them. So in the morning he did just this. He stood on Bill Wetherspoon's doorstep and put the theory to what was, it must be said, an aggrieved and most indignant Bill Wetherspoon. He spat out a quid of chewing tobacco, accompanied by a quantity of brown liquid, which accidentally landed on Alfie's left shoe. And speaking in an angry rush, he said he had never spied on Mrs. Peabody, nor had he ever coveted or purloined the undergarments of any woman in Balham, or anywhere else for that matter. Furthermore, he said that he had never attempted to enter a house by means of a cat flap in his underpants in his life, and in fact called the idea bloody preposterous. In Alfie's view, Bill Wetherspoon was not only unhelpful, but downright rude. And when Alfie suggested to him that he show him what underpants he was wearing, he most unreasonably slammed the door in his face. But Alfie noted that Bill Wetherspoon did not, however, deny a fondness for cream. He was suspicious, but he knew without hard evidence it would be difficult to persuade a public prosecutor to take the case. Nevertheless, having considered the matter, Alfie placed his theory before his superior officer at the station, and although it is not known what occurred at this meeting, I understand it did not go well for Alfie. His sergeant, a man who seemed to be of limited imagination, first inquired whether Alfie had been drinking, and when Alfie indignantly negated this suggestion, he proceeded to make opprobrious remarks on Alfie's intelligence, his state of mind, and even his suitability to being a police officer. Whether or not he actually went so far as to use the words imbecile or ruddy fool in that conversation must remain a matter of conjecture. It seems possible, however, that fruity language was used, and I cannot repeat some of the things it is alleged were said. But when Alfie Rowbotham emerged from the interview, his face was puce, and his ears a dark shade of pink.
I know that many people will be anxious to know if the perpetrator of the act of dispersing cream around Jane Peabody's kitchen was ever discovered, and I regret very much that the culprit was never apprehended. And in spite of my greatest endeavours, I have been unable to come to any firm conclusion on the matter myself, though I understand that Bill Wetherspoon remained indignant to the end of his life at the suggestion that he had lapped up a pot of cream from the kitchen floor whilst in a state of undress. I do know, however, and have it on the most excellent authority, that it was considered a very remarkable thing that later that same evening Jane Peabody's cat became extremely sick. She could think of no reason for this. It's as if he's eaten something rich, she said, mystified, to her niece. And it must be agreed that it was an extraordinary coincidence that two completely unconnected mysteries should present themselves in the same house on the same day, without any possible explanation. I am happy to say, however, that Simba had fully recovered by Christmas Day, and I am assured that Jane Peabody, her niece Ruth, and her husband Alfie Rowbotham, and of course Simba the cat, had a wonderful Christmas, which is something I wish for everyone here.